Your phone lights up on the desk beside you, vibrating with an incoming call. Not a text, not an email, but an actual voice call. And immediately, before you even see the name, your chest tightens, your breath catches slightly, and a wave of something between dread and paralysis washes through your entire body. The ringtone feels unreasonably loud, like an alarm piercing through the quiet space you'd carefully constructed around yourself. And even though you know you should answer, even though it might be important, your hand doesn't reach for the phone, it reaches away from it, as if the device itself has become a small emergency you're not equipped to handle. And yet inside you, there's a complex storm of reactions happening simultaneously. Guilt that you're not answering, anxiety about what the person might want, frustration with yourself for feeling this way about something so simple, and underneath all of it, a bone-deep resistance that feels less like a choice and more like a reflex. You watch the phone buzz and buzz, knowing you'll have to deal with this later, knowing you'll craft a careful text response explaining you missed the call, knowing that others would have simply picked up the phone without this entire internal drama. The call goes to voicemail. Relief floods you, immediately followed by shame. You wonder if something is wrong with you, if you're the only person who finds phone calls uniquely draining, intrusive, almost violating in a way that's difficult to explain to people who answer calls as casually as they open doors. You've tried to articulate it before, the way an unexpected call feels like someone showing up at your house unannounced and demanding immediate access to your attention, your energy, your presence. But people look at you strangely, as if you're being dramatic about something that shouldn't be dramatic. But what if this isn't social anxiety in the clinical sense, or rudeness, or technological incompetence? What if this is actually a sophisticated boundary response developed by a nervous system that processes communication demands differently than others? A system that isn't broken, but calibrated to different thresholds? What if the people who avoid phone calls aren't avoiding connection, but protecting something essential about how they connect? You're about to discover that your phone avoidance reveals something profound about how your mind processes intimacy, spontaneity, and the invisible labor of human interaction. When someone asks why you didn't answer their call and your explanation, "Sorry, I just don't really do phone calls," falls flat, landing in the conversation like a confession of something vaguely antisocial, you can see the judgment forming behind their eyes. From the outside, it looks like avoidance, like you're too busy for them, or worse, like you think you're too important to be interrupted. The lack of immediate availability is interpreted as a lack of care. They think you're being difficult. They think you're antisocial. They think you're one of those people who hides behind screens, incapable of real-time human interaction, choosing the emotional safety of asynchronous communication because you can't handle the vulnerability of a live conversation. Some assume it's generational, that you're so addicted to texting that you've lost the ability to speak. Others assume it's personal, that you're specifically avoiding them, that your failure to answer is a statement about the relationship's worth. What's rarely considered is that phone call avoidance isn't about the person on the other end at all. It's about the format itself, the spontaneous demand it places on your attention, the performance it requires, the lack of control over when your presence is required. This isn't disinterest or rejection. It's a boundary response to a communication medium that feels, to some nervous systems, like an ambush. What people perceive as coldness is actually a sophisticated understanding of your own capacity limitations, a recognition that you engage more authentically when you're prepared, when you've had time to gather yourself, when connection happens on terms that allow you to show up fully rather than frantically. To understand this, we have to step back to how human brains evolved to handle communication demands. For most of human history, face-to-face interaction was the only option, and crucially, it came with context. You could see the person approaching, read their body language from a distance, prepare yourself emotionally for the exchange. Your brain had time to assess threat level, social importance, and appropriate response. The telephone, invented barely 150 years ago, introduced something neurologically novel: disembodied voices making immediate demands with zero preparation time. Your brain receives a voice, an intimate, evolutionarily significant stimulus, but without any of the contextual information it's designed to process alongside that voice. Inside your brain, the anterior cingulate cortex and the prefrontal regions work to manage social prediction and response preparation. When you receive a text or email, these regions have time to construct an appropriate response. You can edit, revise, calibrate your tone, think through implications. Neurologically, here's what happens with a phone call. Your amygdala registers the unexpected stimulus, your nervous system activates before you consciously decide anything, and your prefrontal cortex is expected to immediately perform complex social calculations, interpret tone, generate appropriate responses, track conversational threads, manage your own emotional presentation, all in real time with zero preparation. For some people, this process feels natural, even energizing. For others, it registers as cognitive overload. Research on introverted and highly sensitive nervous systems has shown that these individuals process stimuli more deeply, with more elaborate neural pathways lighting up in response to social information. The brain doesn't distinguish between a physical presence and a voice demanding immediate response. Both activate threat assessment systems designed to evaluate social situations. But for people with lower thresholds for stimulation, the phone call triggers a stress response that others simply don't experience. What looks like avoidance is actually a nervous system saying, "This format exceeds my optimal processing capacity." You're not broken. You're operating exactly as your particular neurology is designed to operate. Long before most people learn that communication can be negotiated on your own terms, some children learn instead that their attention, their presence, their emotional energy is something others are entitled to demand without warning. Perhaps you grew up in an environment where privacy was conditional, where closed doors weren't respected, where your time alone was interrupted frequently, and those interruptions were framed as connection. As love as what family does. When a child's boundaries around their attention and space are repeatedly overridden, not maliciously, often out of parental anxiety or cultural norms around availability, their nervous system learns to brace for intrusion. The phone call then becomes a symbolic recreation of that childhood experience. Someone demanding your immediate presence, your full attention, your emotional labor, with the implicit message that refusing makes you selfish, cold, or difficult. What formed in childhood wasn't phone anxiety specifically. It was a heightened awareness of how much energy involuntary presence requires, and a nervous system trained to protect the limited capacity you have. When you grow up in an environment where your emotional bandwidth is constantly being spent, where someone always needs something, where your attention is constantly redirected, where you're expected to respond immediately to others' needs, your nervous system develops sophisticated conservation strategies. Psychologists call this capacity management, and it's most pronounced in people who experienced early chronic stress or emotional parentification. You learned young that unexpected demands deplete you faster than planned interactions. The phone call represents the ultimate unplanned demand. Someone needs you right now, regardless of where you are emotionally, cognitively, or energetically. Your nervous system isn't being dramatic when it signals danger. It's remembering hundreds of times when saying yes to unexpected demands left you depleted, when being available for others meant being unavailable to yourself. This is why you avoid the call, not because you don't care about the person, but because your system has learned that spontaneous availability comes at a cost you can't always afford to pay. This is why you prefer text. It allows you to respond when you have capacity, to craft responses that accurately reflect your thoughts rather than whatever your anxious brain produces under pressure, to engage without the performance aspect that phone calls demand. Phone calls require simultaneous processing of tone, content, timing, turn-taking, emotional management, and response generation. Studies have observed that people with phone anxiety aren't avoiding connection. They're avoiding the specific cognitive load that real-time voice communication demands. There's also the emotional labor component that rarely gets discussed. Phone calls require you to manage not just your own emotions, but the other person's experience of the conversation. You're tracking whether they sound upset, whether you've said something wrong, whether awkward silences are your fault, whether you should end the call or keep going. Text removes this burden. You can focus on content without performing emotional availability in real time. These patterns follow you into adult relationships, where partners or friends interpret your phone avoidance as emotional distance, where job expectations around availability feel like violations, where you're marked as difficult or high maintenance for needing what others take for granted. Control over when you're accessible. You've likely been told you're bad at communication, when the truth is you're meticulous about communication. You just need it to happen in formats that don't deplete you. You've been told you need to just answer the phone, as if willpower could override a nervous system response that developed over decades. The identity you've built includes the quiet knowledge that you're different in this way, that what feels casual to others feels costly to you, and that gap creates a low-level shame you carry into every missed call, every voicemail you dread listening to, every time you have to explain why you don't do phone calls. Beneath the practical explanations you give people, "I'm bad at phone calls, I prefer texting, I must have missed it," there's a layer most people never admit to carrying: shame. The quiet belief that there's something fundamentally wrong with you, that you're failing at a basic human function that everyone else has mastered, that your inability to simply answer the phone marks you as socially deficient in some essential way. You've internalized the frustration of people who can't understand why you make this so complicated. In a culture that treats constant availability as a virtue, that frames immediate responsiveness as respect and delayed response as rudeness, that sees phone avoidance as generational weakness or social anxiety disorder, your natural communication preferences become pathologized. The shame doesn't come from the behavior itself. It comes from being told repeatedly that your way of managing your energy and attention is wrong, immature, or inconsiderate. You've been made to feel that boundaries around accessibility are boundaries you shouldn't need. But shame thrives on misattribution, on believing that your phone avoidance reveals character flaws rather than nervous system differences. Here's what's actually true. Your resistance to phone calls isn't about being difficult. It's about recognizing that you engage more authentically when you're not ambushed, that your best self shows up when connection is invited rather than demanded, that real intimacy requires energy you can't access on command. Not broken, adapted, not deficiency, difference, not antisocial, differently social. The people who thrive on spontaneous phone calls aren't more evolved or more connected. They're simply calibrated to different communication thresholds. Their nervous systems happen to find real-time voice interaction energizing or neutral. Yours finds it depleting. Neither system is superior. They're just different operating systems for human connection. You're not failing to communicate. You're communicating with boundaries that honor your actual capacity instead of performing availability you don't have. There's nothing defective about protecting the energy you need to show up meaningfully in your relationships, your work, your life. For many people, phone calls serve as efficient connection points, quick check-ins that maintain relationships without the time investment of meeting in person, spontaneous conversations that feel intimate and immediate. They experience the unplanned nature of calls as excitement rather than intrusion, the real-time exchange as enlivening rather than depleting. Their nervous systems are wired to process spontaneous interaction as low-cost, even rewarding. But phone avoidance isn't about opting out of connection. It's about recognizing that your connection capacity is distributed differently. Where others spend small amounts of energy across many spontaneous interactions, you concentrate your relational energy into fewer, more intentional exchanges. The space where others place casual phone calls isn't empty in your life. It's occupied by thoughtful text conversations where you can be more articulate. By in-person meetings where you can read full context, by carefully crafted responses that actually reflect your thinking rather than your anxiety. Neither path is superior. What matters is authentic connection, not the medium through which it travels. You haven't opted out of relationships. You've concentrated your limited social energy into formats where you can show up as your actual self rather than a panicked version performing real-time availability. The phone call avoiders aren't less connected. They're just connected through different channels, and often, when they do connect, they do so with remarkable depth precisely because they've conserved the energy to be truly present. When you step back and look at the whole picture, the nervous system adaptation, the childhood roots, the cognitive load differences, the shame you've carried, you begin to see that your phone avoidance isn't the problem you thought it was. It's not evidence of social dysfunction or emotional immaturity. It's evidence that you've learned something crucial about yourself. that you have limits around spontaneous availability, that honoring those limits allows you to engage more authentically, that the cost of performing constant accessibility is higher for you than the social awkwardness of setting boundaries. People who avoid phone calls aren't communication averse. They're format-specific connectors who understand intuitively that how you communicate shapes what you can communicate. They're not hiding from intimacy, they're protecting the conditions under which real intimacy becomes possible for them. They're people whose nervous systems require preparation, whose authenticity needs space, whose depth emerges from reflection rather than real-time performance. This shaped you into someone who thinks before speaking, who values intentional connection, who refuses to mistake availability for intimacy. This isn't about forcing yourself to answer every call or pretending phone anxiety doesn't exist. It's about recognizing that your communication preferences are valid, that boundaries around your attention aren't selfish, and that you get to choose connection formats that work for your actual nervous system rather than the one you're supposed to have. Some of this can shift with practice. Neuroplasticity means patterns can change, but only if you want them to, and only in ways that honor rather than override your fundamental needs. If this video put words to something you felt but never quite articulated, if you've been carrying quiet shame about your phone avoidance, wondering if something was wrong with you, you're not alone. There are millions of people whose nervous systems are wired this way, who experience phone calls as demanding rather than casual, and who connect more authentically through other channels. I'd love to hear your experience. Drop a comment and share. What's your go-to excuse when you don't answer a call? And how do people react when you tell them you just don't like talking on the phone? What would it feel like to stop apologizing for this? And if you want more conversations like this, about the quiet patterns of the human mind, the things we don't usually name, the ways we're different that we've been taught to see as deficient, consider subscribing to the channel. We explore these spaces together, making sense of the parts of ourselves we thought we had to hide.